This is our English Literature, Chapter 4, The Railway Children. This story was written in 1906 when trains were drawn by steam engines. Here, there are three siblings: Roberta, who is known as Bobby, then Phyllis and Peter, and they live near a country railway line and like to wave to the train every day as it goes past. So now let us read the chapter and find out what happens one day when a landslide blocks the railway track. They went along the fence towards the little swing gate that is at the top of the steps, and they were almost at the gate when Bobby said, "Hush, stop, what's that?" That was a very odd noise indeed, a soft noise, but quite plainly to be heard through the sound of the wind in the branches, and the hum and whir of the telegraph wires. It was a sort of rustling, whispering sound. As they listened, it stopped and then began again. And this time it did not stop but grew louder and more rustling and rumbling. So in this story, there are three children. They are Roberta, who is also known as Bobby, Phyllis, and then Peter. So one day, when these children were walking on the top of the hill beside the railway line, they heard something very odd. And at first, when they heard, it was soft. The noise was soft, and then later on, it started to grow louder and louder. "Look," cried Peter suddenly, "the tree over there." The tree he pointed at was one of those that have rough gray leaves and white flowers. The berries, when they come, are bright scarlet, but if you pick them, they disappoint you by turning black before you get them home. And as Peter pointed, the tree was moving, not just the way trees ought to move when the wind blows through them, but all in one piece, as though it were a live creature and were walking down the side of the cutting. "It's moving," cried Bobby. "Oh, look, and so are the others. It's like the woods in Macbeth." "It's magic," said Phyllis, breathlessly. "I always knew the railway was enchanted." It really did seem a little like magic, for all the trees for about 20 yards of the opposite bank seemed to be slowly walking down towards the railway line, the tree with the grey leaves bringing up the rear like some old shepherd driving a flock of green sheep. So, here these children saw something very unusual. They saw that a tree on the opposite side of the railway line was moving slowly down the slope, and the other trees followed. And for them, it was like a magic. It was like the woods in Macbeth. Here, Macbeth is a play written by Shakespeare. They felt like they are living creature and they are walking down the slope, and the tree is like the shepherd driving a flock of green sheep as it comes last. "What is it? Oh, what is it?" said Phyllis. "It's much too magic for me. I don't like it. Let's go home." But Bobby and Peter clung fast to the rail and watched breathlessly, and Phyllis made no movement towards going home by herself. The trees moved on and on. Some stones and loose earth fell down, rattled, and on the railway metals far below. "It's all coming down," Peter said. Peter tried to say, but he found there was hardly any voice to say it with. And indeed, just as he spoke, the great rock on the top of which the walking trees were leaned slowly forward. So now even the grass and stones moved, and soon Half of the hillside was moving, and everything came cracking down onto the railway line below. And for Phyllis, it was more than a magic. She was terrified and wanted to go home, but could not go all by herself. The trees, ceasing to walk, stood still and shivered. Leaning with a rock, they seemed to hesitate a moment, and then rock and trees and grass and bushes, with a rushing sound, slipped right away from the face of the cutting and fell on the line with a blundering crash that could have been heard half a mile off. A cloud of dust rose up. "Oh," said Peter in awestruck tones, "isn't it exactly like when coals come in? If there wasn't any roof to the cellar and you could see down." "Look, what a great mound it's made," said Bobby. "Yes, it's right across the down line," said Phyllis. "That'll take some sweeping up," said Bobby. "Yes," said Peter slowly. He was still leaning on the fence. "Yes," he said again, still more slowly. "The 11:29 town hasn't gone by yet. We must let them know at the station, or there'll be a most frightful accident. Let's run," said Bobby, and began. So now that they saw everything was cracking and coming down onto the railway line, they decided to go and inform the train driver. But Peter cried, "Come back and look at Mother's watch." He was very prompt and businesslike, and his face looked whiter than they had ever seen it. "No time," he said. "It's 10 miles away, and it's past 11. "Couldn't we," suggested Phyllis breathlessly, "couldn't we climb up the telegraph poles and do something to the wires?" "We don't know how," said Peter. "They do it in war," said Phyllis. "I know, I have heard of it." "They only cut them, silly," said Peter. "And that doesn't do any good. And we couldn't cut them even if we got up, and we couldn't get up. If we have anything red, we could go down on the line and wave it." They got down the steep stairs. Bobby was pale and shivering. Peter's face looked thinner than usual. Phyllis was red-faced and damp with anxiety. "Oh, how hot I am," she said. "And I thought it was going to be cold. I wish we hadn't put on our—" She stopped short and then ended in quite a different tone. "Our flannel petticoats." Bobby turned at the bottom of the stairs. "Oh, yes," cried she. "They're red. Let's take them off." They did, and with the petticoats rolled up under their arms, ran along the railway, skirting the newly fallen mound of stones and the rocks and earth and bent, crushed, twisted trees. They ran at their best pace. Peter led, but the girls were not far behind. They reached the corner that hid the mound from the straight line of railway that ran half a mile without curve or corner. Now, Phyllis suggests that they should climb the telegraph post and do something to the wire. But Peter said that won't do any good to them. Then he said that if they had anything red, it would do something to them. Then the girls had the red petticoats, so with that they made the flags and move around the edge of the mound. And as Peter is a boy, he reached fast and followed by Bobby and Phyllis. "Now," said Peter, taking hold of the largest flannel petticoat. "You are not," Phyllis faltered. "You are not going to tear them." "Shut up," said Peter with brief sternness. "Oh, yes," said Bobby. "Tear them into little bits if you like. Don't you see, Phil? If we can't stop the train, there'll be a real life accident with people killed. Oh, horrible. Here, Peter, you'll never tear it through the band. She took the red flannel petticoat from him and tore it off an inch from the band. Then she tore the other one in the same way. There, said Peter, tearing in his turn. He divided each petticoat into 3 pieces. Now we have got 6 flags. So the word here, flannel petticoat, means a light, loose garment made of soft woolen cloth, and it is worn by a girl under a dress. So they decided to make the flags with the flannel petticoat of Bobby and Phyllis. And Phyllis didn't want to tear them, but Bobby tears them into pieces, and later on they divided each piece into 3 pieces and made 6 flags. He looked at the watch again, and we have got 7 minutes. We must have flagstaffs. The knives given to boys are, for some odd reason, seldom of the kind of steel that keeps sharp. The young saplings had to be broken off. 2 came up by the roots. The leaves were stripped from them. We must cut holes in the flags and run the stick through the holes, said Peter. And the holes were cut. The knife was sharp enough to cut flannel with. 2 of the flags were set up in heaps of loose stones beneath the sleepers of the down line. Then Phyllis and Roberta each took a flag and stood ready to wave it as soon as the train came in sight. I shall have the other 2 myself, said Peter, because it was my idea to wave something red. There are petticoats, though Phyllis was beginning, but Bobby interrupted. Oh, what does it matter who waves what, if we can only save the train? So now Peter looked at his watch again, and he tells that they have got just 7 minutes. They made holes in the flag and put a stick through it. Then they put 2 flags in heaps of loose stones beneath the sleepers. Here, sleeper means the heavy beams of concrete or wood on which the rails of a railway are fixed. Then Peter and Phyllis argue among themselves who would wave what. And Bobby interrupts them and says that what matters is to save the train. Perhaps Peter had not rightly calculated the number of minutes it would take the 11:29 to get from the station to the place where they were, or perhaps the train was late. Anyway, it seemed a very long time that they waited. Phyllis grew impatient. I expect the watch is wrong and the train's gone by, said she. Peter relaxed the heroic attitude he had chosen to show off his 2 flags, and Bobby began to feel sick with suspense. Now they waited for long, and Phyllis grew impatient and says that the watch is wrong and the train might have gone already. Then Bobby started to feel sick with suspense. It seemed to her that they had been standing there for hours and hours, holding these silly little red flags that no one would ever notice. The train wouldn't care. It would go rushing by them and tear round a corner and go crashing into that awful mound, and everyone would be killed. Her hands grew very cold and trembled so that she could hardly hold the flag, And then came the distant rumble and hum of the metals, and a puff of white steam shot far away along the stretch of line. So now that they had been standing there for a long time, she started to think that the train would come rushing and tear down around the corner and go crushing into the awful mount, the small hill, and everyone will be killed. So Bobby started to think all these things. And thinking all this, her hands grew very cold and trembled, that she could hardly hold the flag. Stand firm, said Peter, and wave like mad. When it gets to that big furze bush, step back, but go on waving. Don't stand on the line, Bobby. The train came rattling along very, very fast. They won't see us. They won't see us. It's all no good, cried Bobby. The two little flags on the line swayed as the nearing train shook and loosened the heaps of loose stones that held them up. One of them slowly leaned over and fell on the line. Bobby jumped forward and caught it up and waved it. Her hands did not tremble now. It seemed that the train came on as fast as ever. It was very near. Keep off the line, you silly cuckoo, said Peter fiercely. So now, after waiting for a long time, the train came rattling very fast. Then one of them said that the driver of the train won't see us. Then, as the train was nearing, it shook the stones, it loosened the stones, and then the flags that they have kept on the hips of the stone fell on the line, and Bobby took that and waved as much as she can. It's no good, Bobby said again. Stand back, cried Peter suddenly, and he dragged Phyllis back by the arm. But Bobby cried, not yet, not yet, and waved her two flags right over the line. The front of the engine looked black and enormous. Its voice was loud and harsh. Oh, stop, 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 cried Bobby. No one heard her. At least Peter and Phyllis didn't, for the ongoing rush of the train covered the sound of her voice with a mountain of sound. But afterwards she used to wonder whether the engine itself had not heard her. It seemed almost as though it had, for it slackened swiftly, slackened and stopped, not 20 yards from the place where Bobby's two flags waved over the line. She saw the great black engine stop dead, but somehow she could not stop waving the flags. And when the driver and the fireman had got off the engine, and Peter and Phyllis had gone to meet them and pour out their excited tale of the awful mount just round the corner, Bobby still waved the flags, but more and more feebly and jerkily. When the others turned towards her, she was lying across the line with her hands flung forward and still creeping the sticks of the little red flannel flags. The engine driver picked her up, carried her to the train, and laid her on the cushions of a first-class carriage. Gone right off in a faint, he said. Poor little woman, and no wonder. So now, as the train came nearer and nearer to her, she continued waving her two little flags, and she tried to stop the train by her voice, but no one could hear him, because the sound of the engine was more louder than anything else. Then the train came nearer and stopped only 20 meters away from Bobby. So they had succeeded in saving the train, but Bobby still waved the flags more feebly and jerkily. Then the engine driver picked Bobby and carried her to the train and laid her on the cushion as she has fainted.